This represents the fourth and final section of 1.2 Order of Operations lesson. Our strategy has been broken down to 3 levels so far, even though this is the opposite of what we're used to. We talked about addition and subtraction being the bottom level. They were like students in a lunch line. We did them last. The multiplication and division was the second level. That looked like teachers, so again we fed them before we fed our students. And then we talked about how exponents was like the principal, the most important person in the school, so they were more important than multiplication and division. We also learned that we had to take care of exponents before we did anything else. And then once our exponents were gone, we dealt with, as I like to say, the VIP in line, which is our multiplication and division. Depending on who was first in line, then our addition and subtraction from front to back. This lesson is going to close our experience with order of operations as we look at the fourth and final level of PEMDAS, which is parentheses. The top priority in the order of operations is parentheses. Alright? And that term parentheses can be used mentally for any grouping symbol. These are all considered to work like parentheses. It's just that they look different, and so they'll confuse you a little bit when you see them. These are actually officially parentheses. These here are actually called brackets, and these here are called braces. But again, they all have the same general workout or working of parentheses. Typically they change whenever they're nested. What that means is there's one inside of another. In other words, instead of writing 6 parentheses 2 plus 5 parentheses 6 with all those parentheses, which gets confusing because there is a parentheses nested inside of another, they usually switch to the bracket so that you can see that this one belongs to that and that this one belongs to that. So again, it's not necessary that you do it, but the book will usually use it because they don't want it to look too confusing whenever you get to the problem. Be very careful, because although parentheses are your top priority, it does not mean that you should jump to every parentheses that you see, because there are some times when it's not actually a parentheses, it's just a fancy way of writing multiplication. So the priority of parentheses only comes into play when there are actual operations on the inside of it. So the only time you work it out is whenever there's things inside of it. It's easy to identify them in other grouping symbols because they stand out, but the key issue is whenever we confuse parentheses notation with multiplication notation. So what we're going to do is circle the problems that are parentheses notation, not multiplication notation. And again, the way we do that is by looking at this and saying, is there anything inside these parentheses that can be worked out? And the answer to that is no. This is just a 2. That is not parentheses notation, that is multiplication. In this problem, is there anything that can be worked out in the parentheses? Obviously you can do your 2 plus 4. So that does represent your parentheses, the P portion of your order of operations. When you look here, yes, there is a squared, but in terms of what's on the inside, there's nothing here that needs to be worked out. There's also nothing in here that needs to be worked out. That is not parentheses notation, that is just multiplication. But when you look in the last one, there's a squared, there's a plus. That does represent parentheses notation. Visually, what happens is the parentheses attract the focus of our sight, as if they're forcing us to look at that portion of the problem, and so therefore it works out that parentheses is more important because they naturally just draw your attention to look inside of them. Whenever you encounter an expression with parentheses, just make sure you work out the inside as if it was a separate problem. So we're not going to work this part all the way out, but I just want to show you what to do whenever there are parentheses and what it is you ignore everything else. So if we had this problem here and we have things on the inside, we ignore this here and we use our order of operations and say, what would we do first? We have a subtraction, an exponent, addition. Again, we would take care of our 3 squared. So rewrite your 5 plus your 12 minus 9, because remember you'd be 3 times 3 plus 2, and then rewrite everything else on the outside of the parentheses as is. We still have parentheses, so again we ignore everything else and say, what would we do first here? Of course, this is subtraction and addition, so we work it out in order. So 12 minus 9 is first, so 5 plus parentheses 3 plus 2 plus 6 divided by 3. We still have parentheses, so we again ignore everything else and say, what can we do here? 3 plus 2 turns into 5, and again everything else gets rewritten. Putting 3 dots in my notes usually means there's more work to be done, but I think you know how to get that work done, so we're not going to waste our time in terms of work on that. The general idea was just that you need to work out the parentheses until you get down to one number, and then do the problem as if you know how to do it. Alright, so quickly on these examples that we have before we wrap it up. First thing we do is we look at this and recognize that this is on the inside of a parentheses, and so that is the most important part. So 4 plus 10 divided by 5, I'll write it again. 4 plus 10 divided by 5, parentheses 5, minus 6 because 2 plus 3 turned into 5. There are no exponents, so there's nothing to worry about. But the first VIP in line is here. Again, that is not a parentheses because that is just a 5. That's multiplication. So the first thing we do is division. 4 plus 2, parentheses 5, minus 6. The next VIP in line is this multiplication. And from there, all we have left is addition, subtraction, which we know we work from front to back, getting our final answer. The second example, on the inside only, is 10 minus 3. This has nothing to do with on the inside, so we simply turn 10 minus 3 into 7 with the squared. And be careful because a lot of people, again, see the parentheses, so they multiply, but remember the exponent is the most important part. So that's 7 times 7, which turns into 49. And then 3 times 49, if you don't know, go off to the side. 9 times 3 is 27, carry the 2. 3 times 4 is 12 plus 2, which is 14. It means that my answer is 147. Alright. Next example. On the inside we have more than one operation, but the strongest operation there is your 3 squared, which is 9. So 3 times 10 minus 9. That's still on the inside, so we do that first. So 3 times 1, which is 3. Your fourth example shows us what happens when we have brackets and other things. Again, the first thing that catches our attention is the brackets, but inside those brackets is a parentheses, which means the first thing we do is 8 minus 4. So rewrite everything else carefully. Again, the hardest part to order of operations is the rewrite. Now inside of this we have this portion here, but again the most important part there is the exponent. So we do 4 to the third, which is 16 times 4. That is 24, carry the 2, 4, 5, 6. So 3 bracket 64 divided by 8 close plus 5. Now on the inside we have 64 divided by 8, which we know to be 8. Remember that parentheses, brackets, and braces all mean the same thing. This means multiply, which is 3 times 8 or 24 plus 5, and 24 plus 5 is 29. So again, the parentheses adds a little bit to it, but it doesn't do much to really hurt you as long as you understand and get some practice working with them. You might want to make a note for this fifth one, and that is that we work out the top first, work out the bottom second, and then we divide our answer third. So what's going to happen is, and again, you'll get more used to it as you practice it, and you will learn which shortcuts actually work and which ones don't. But first thing we're going to do is work out the top as if the bottom wasn't there, and the first thing we're going to do is multiply to make it 14 plus 4 over 9 divided by 3. Still again ignoring the bottom. 14 plus 4 turns into 18 over 9 divided by 3. Now that the top is done, work out the bottom. 9 divided by 3 is 3, so it's 18 over 3. And now we divide 18 divided by 3, which is 6. Your final thought is that parentheses do make the expression look more complex, but just remember again to focus on using your logic to identify what is first, and then rewrite the rest and repeat. If you learn the rules and take your time, you'll eventually fight your way to the answer. But again, that's where the practice comes in, and making sure you're doing your job with the time you have to get as much as you can out of it. So again, make sure you're asking questions, make sure you're speaking up, and that you're fighting to understand this, because I don't think it's tough for you to do as long as you fight to get it. So other than that, good luck, and let's see what happens.